Before we let you go, do want to ask you a question about creatine. We know that you are what I would consider to be an expert on creatine, and this supplement just keeps popping up everywhere with so
Hmm.
many amazing and wonderful benefits, super well tested. Can you tell us a little bit about creatine and what some of the latest research is around it and how much people should be taking?
Yeah, creatine I always describe as the gift that keeps on giving because it's been around a long time.
Right.
People were using it in the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. I think the example that people always point to is that Linford Christie was taking it. Whether he was taking anything else, I don't know. But, but creatine is most popular among strength and power enthusiasts, people who are trying to be bigger and stronger. And that's in part because when you take creatine on a regular basis, you boost your muscles' phosphocreatine stores. And these are turned over quickly during brief, high intensity exercise. And by boosting those stores, you can better support energy provision during things such as running the 100 meters or doing a set of 10 in the back squat, whatever it might be. Creatine also has some effects that aid muscle growth independently. So it can stimulate certain muscle growth pathways. It will also increase the hydration status of muscle cells. And that might have some other benefits in, for example, exercise in the heat. But while a lot of people have focused on those benefits of creatine, more recently, there's been a substantial amount of research into some of the effects of creatine in different bodily tissues, including the brain. And based on this research, people are now interested in supplementing creatine in a variety of different disorders, everything from neurodegenerative disorders. To be honest, the evidence in favor of that right now isn't hugely strong, but it's another instance in which I don't really see a downside to using creatine for the most part. People are interested in using creatine for traumatic brain injury, things like sports-related concussions, in various different metabolic health problems. So, for example, there's some evidence that creatine can help with blood sugar regulation. If you think about trying to improve your blood sugar control, then having more skeletal muscle is almost always a good thing because skeletal muscle is your largest glucose sensitive sink in which to pour the glucose that you consume. And if creatine can help in that process, then it's bound to be a good thing. And then if you think about the fact that we have an aging population, as people get older, they tend to lose muscle, sarcopenia, and therefore lose their ability to produce force and produce force quickly, dyspnea, and creatine can potentially help counter those age-related changes in musculoskeletal function. But with respect to the brain specifically, one reason I personally find creatine fascinating is just that it also it seems to help people better cope with sleep disruption. This hasn't been well studied yet, but creatine boosts phosphocreatine stores in the brain as well. It does so substantially in some non-human animals. So in rodents, it can probably boost brain phosphocreatine stores something like 30%, whereas in humans, maybe it boosts brain phosphocreatine stores more like 10% or so, although there might be some ways of increasing stores further. But by doing so, creatine helps counter the accumulation of some sleep promoting chemicals in the brain during the day. So while you're active each day, while you're awake, your brain needs energy. And in the process of expending energy, you see an accumulation in some chemicals, including adenosine and adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which people describe as the energy currency of your cells, in the spaces between the cells in your brain. And I won't go into the details, but basically as those accumulate during the day, there's an increasing pressure to sleep. And that pressure can ultimately cause a kind of local sleep in certain brain circuits that are heavily used during the day. People think of sleep as being this monolithic state in which the whole brain is asleep all at once, but actually your brain can have regional sleep. And what happens is that sleep can start in certain areas and then spread out into other areas, into cortical columns. And so what creatine might do is reduce the accumulation of adenosine and ATP in those spaces between the cells in your brain, and therefore reduce that pressure to sleep. And it might be helpful to understand that caffeine also works in some related ways. So whereas creatine helps reduce the accumulation of those sleep promoting chemicals, caffeine blocks the interaction of those chemicals with their receptors in the brain. And so with all of that said, what we know so far is that if you add creatine to the chow of rats for several weeks, then you boost brain phosphocreatine stores, you reduce that sleep pressure, the animals sleep substantially less, they have less deep sleep, they also have less rebound sleep after sleep deprivation. If I deprived you of sleep tonight, Casey, I wouldn't do that, don't worry.
Thank you.
And then the following evening, we looked at your sleep. You would sleep more than you would have done had you not been deprived of sleep. That's rebound sleep. After creatine intake, you don't see such big rebound sleep. And so in some ways, after creatine supplementation, sleep looks a bit like sleep looks in genetically short sleepers. They have a very similar sleep phenotype. And based on this, assuming that those results carry over to humans, and I understand that there's a study that's been done that has found this, albeit to a lesser extent than what's present in rats, it might be a fantastic supplement to take when you know that you're not going to be getting enough shut-eye, because we all go through periods in which we're burning the candle for whatever reason. Maybe you've just had your first child and your sleep is constantly being fragmented by nocturnal crying and your partner breastfeeding and so on. And if that's the case, then I think supplementing with creatine is a really smart idea, especially given its other health benefits. There is work looking at the effects of creatine supplementation on performance following sleep deprivation, showing some positive effects. This has been shown for some physical tasks. So one of these is a study of professional rugby players that looked at how accurately they passed the ball after sleep loss, finding that creatine helped maintain their performance when they were short on sleep. There's some work looking at some aspects of cognition that are relevant to workplace performance, finding that those are better preserved after sleep deprivation among people who take creatine monohydrate. And so I think based on all of that, if you know that you're going through a period of sleep loss and you want to support your body as well as you can, it might make sense to take a moderate to high dose of creatine each day around that time. If you are going by the studies that have been done so far, then you might go through a loading phase prior to that period of sleep loss, in which you would take 5 grams of creatine 4 times a day, so 20 grams per day in total. The reason that you divide the dose in that way is just that creatine has quite a strong osmotic effect. It tends to pull water towards it, and if you consume too much at once, obviously that can influence your digestion, leading to some discomfort. And then after 5 to 7 days of that, you'll probably fully saturate your muscles' phosphocreatine stores. We don't know as much about the degree to which you'll saturate your brain's phosphocreatine stores, but that's the type of loading protocol that's been used in these particular studies. If you're just using creatine on a regular basis, then lots of different dosing protocols can work. You don't have to go through that loading phase. You could just take a fixed dose each day. We don't really know what the dosing schedule that's ideal is. It might vary a bit between people, but to be honest, there don't seem to be big differences between studies using different dosing protocols. And I think that if somebody's taking roughly 5 grams of creatine per day, they're going to get all of those benefits. Personally, I take it each morning with breakfast because carbohydrate and protein can aid creatine uptake. And I think that's a practical way to go for most people. And then in terms of the creatine itself, you want to get creatine monohydrate. A lot of people will get CreaPure creatine, which is just a micronized form of creatine, on the assumption that its purity is better than a lot of creatines that are on the market. That's sometimes true. There are also non-pure creatine monohydrates that are high quality too. And my impression is that most of the creatine that's on the market is actually creatine monohydrate and what you want it to be. Fortunately, it's really inexpensive. There aren't really any contraindications to taking it. Maybe some people who have some kidney problems, maybe some inborn, some genetic disorders of dysfunctional creatine metabolism, which are very rare, obviously. One that I think is interesting that would give me pause is people who experience hypomania. So if you have bipolar disorder and you're going through a phase in which you're just full of energy and you can barely sleep, maybe creatine would help you better cope during that phase. But I also wonder if it could exacerbate it, because one of the interesting applications of creatine is that it does seem to boost mood a little bit too. There have been a couple of studies looking at creatine supplementation and treatment-resistant depression. Women who haven't responded to conventional antidepressant medications, things like SSRIs, showing that creatine monohydrate supplementation can help in those instances. If somebody's mood is already through the roof and they're full of beans, I just wonder whether creatine could exacerbate that. There's not really evidence showing that. If anything, the evidence so far suggests that creatine can actually be helpful in bipolar, but that does make me think twice about supplementing creatine. So that was a whistle-stop tour of some of the reasons creatine is so interesting, but we barely scratched the surface.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. That's such great information that's going to come in handy in a few months when the World Cup is on and I'm watching TV way too late. It'll come in handy another few months after that when Netflix drops the next series of Formula One, which I'm absolutely hooked on, and they drop 10 episodes of Formula One. I'm going to watch them one by one by one. So good.